Just fucking do it. Subscribe now. Before I went to sleep last night, I went back and checked some of the notes from the 90s. I didn't take too many notes then because again, the kids didn't get anything. All they did is go out and do the deals or not do the deals. Some of you know that about 3 years ago, when they were doing a documentary on me, it never got published, by the way, but doing a documentary, they were interviewing people, and the director was working out at a gym outside Washington, D.C., and somebody came up to him and said, well, what are you doing now? I'm doing a documentary on this guy, Dan Peña. And the guy that he said this to was the owner of the gym. He says, well, I went to the seminar, et cetera, et cetera. So there's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people that have either come to the seminar that I haven't seen or that have used the material, like many of you used the material before you got here. Okay. But all of them fall into two categories. 99% are cowards. I call them cunts, but I think it's more reflective of what you really are instead of a coward. It's easy to say you're a coward. It's not easy for you to say. It's easy for me to say. But a cunt, because that's kind of translates into any language that you're less than. If you're a guy, you're a cunt. Okay? There's no good way to say that in a sentence that I'm aware of, anyway. From Arabic to, Slav, that it's a compliment. So when I started seminars and I was calling people cunts, I thought that I couldn't come up with a more derogatory term to get my point across. And I thought that this would shame people into action. I was wrong. Never underestimate how wrong you can be. And I've tried to come up with phrases, words since then. May 1993, when I gave my first seminar at the Sheraton Hotel, I had 61 people in there. They paid $1,000 a head to provoke them into action. And since the last almost 30 years, it has become more and more difficult to provoke them into action. I said yesterday, and there's a slide coming up, most people don't have balls enough to say they have no balls. I didn't understand that 30 years ago. Because where I came from, then fighting words. I mean, you go to the wall or the floor or whatever. Certainly my experience with my own family, i.e. my dad, my experience in the military, was completely different. If you called somebody like that, you just, you couldn't say anything. Most people didn't refer to people's mothers because mothers were off site. You didn't, that was over the top. That was too insulting. Okay? But I've even used that. And there's no group of words that evokes the kind of response that it should when you're being insulted. I've used God. The various religions. I mean, I've tried everything to try to spark life, the Neanderthal that you have in your loins. To date, I have not come up with a word or a phrase insulting enough to get you to get up off your dead fucking asses. The best revenge is success. I heard that a long time ago. I don't know who said it. Somebody said it. It wasn't me. Probably one of the current gurus claims he said it, but anyway. And we have seen people that have seen, well, if that asshole can do it, I should be able to do it because he's not the sweat off my balls. Because you've already made decisions about certain people in the audience, in the group, your colleagues, if you will. Fuck, that idiot. You may not articulate it that way, because as a Hall of Famer, double Harvard graduate, which doesn't mean anything, says Mr. Peña says things we don't even dare to think. which is absolutely correct. And I've been doing that since I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, and I got in a lot of trouble for it. But when you see somebody, we have a guy in New York who's a recovering lawyer, a gangster lawyer, who dropped out of the program. This is several years ago. And then the last Zoom call that he, not the last Zoom call, YouTube that he saw, after the fact, he saw a guy that was from his class had made 10 or 20 acquisitions. He said, fuck. And he started up again, and now he's successful. So seeing somebody that you think is less than you, not less than, it's not about averages or medians or things like that, evokes some sort of response, some sort of the caveman response that I have 24/7, 365. But if I can't shame you, what's there left? Fear. What are you going to tell your kids, your grandkids, or whatever? What did you do during the greatest transformation of wealth in the history of the planet? What are you going to tell them? Because somebody's going to write a book, not me. Somebody's going to write in Britain's going to write a white paper. They love white papers here. 5 or 6 years to write the obvious, and then it's too late, but because the white paper. What's happening right now in the SNP politics here in Scotland, which I've been saying since 10 years. I mean, seriously, the last couple of years since I considered politics, what the SNP was worthless morons, and it was run by a moron, and it was incestuous, and now it's all coming out in the newspapers. I'm not getting any credit. Nobody's asking me to fucking interview me, and I've been saying it for years. And so I expect 100 years after I'm dead, which is a long time from now, somebody will write some, it's like the first person who wrote the memoirs of Benjamin Franklin, or George Washington, that I was some stellar fucking Einstein genius from another planet, an alien, because I figured all this shit out. But I'm not willing to wait that long. I want the recognition now, not for me, but for you. And certain people like TK and Gabriel and Marcus Bauer and Bavarian Bob and a lot of other guys and gals have done that, but that's only a tip of the iceberg. Because for every one of those, there's 100 or 500 or 1,000 that have proven successful with QLA, maybe not to the TK's level, but everybody's got their limitations. One of the things I can guarantee, if you follow the program, everybody's richer than they were before they started the program. But, the fact that you had 1 million and now you got 2 million, so what? And first of all, 1 million's not what it used to be. I think everybody knows that. When I went to visit my high school that I tried to burn down 3 weeks before graduation in 1963, and I'm sitting with a principal, and I told you it's under construction, and the government bond that took 25 years to get is spending about $180+ million to revamp the school, and now it's a charter school for smart kids. It's just beyond me that school could be a charter school for smart kids. And she said, the principal was saying, we were talking about it costs nothing to go there. Okay? And the houses across the street, which are shacks, not as big as this part of the room, $700,000-800,000. Shacks. And yet, probably when part of their estate, if they got a couple of other things, they're going to die millionaires. People across the street from where I went to high school, which is a joke. So $1 million isn't what it used to be, and even though I've created 1 million millionaires, but how do you evoke permanent, lasting change? A difficult question. I said yesterday, change management has lost, the concept of change management has changed in 40, 50 years. Change management after World War II was, we didn't get you to change your management style. We took the whole motherfucking management team out and brought in a new management team. That's what change management was supposed to be. And of course, now we all know that's not true. The last person, or one of the last persons that individually believed wholeheartedly in change management was Jack Welch, the great CEO of General Electric. Neutron Jack, I made that example. Rank and yank. There's nobody in this room that's going to rank and yank when they go back. Nobody. I know that, but I still teach it, even though I know nobody's going to do it. Because the last thing that you want to be known as is Neutron John or Neutron Sally or that, You walk around the block backwards before you'd want to be known as that. And I showed you the list of high-performance people yesterday that you aspire to be wealthy like they are, but you're not willing to make any of the sacrifices they made. How is that possible? Can't you connect those two dots? It's because you don't want to connect the dots. It's because you're not really hungry enough and you're not desperate enough. People come here out of inspiration or desperation. A couple of you think you're inspired. What are you smoking? Give me some of that shit. Give me some of that Kool-Aid so I can get high. But you're not willing to make the sacrifices. But basically, that's down. You're either a warrior or a coward. There's nothing in between. Nothing. You may not be, and I use William Wallace of Scottish fame sarcastically. You may not be William Wallace, turning the English back at Hadrian's Wall or Falkirk Bridge, but you're some derivative of there. But most of you wouldn't have fought in William Wallace's army. Because there was a 60, 70% chance you weren't going to come back. You wouldn't. It's like the major we had, the Air Force major, who was filling the lieutenant colonel slot. His battalion, 40% of his men won't touch a gun. Fuck. How is that possible? Won't touch a gun. So, a cowardly cunt. I've tried that. You're shameless. You're shameless. Which is a sad commentary. But in 2004, Professor Hawkins of Cambridge fame said, a few years before I said the planet was through, he said, we're on a third-rate planet with a species, us, slightly more intelligent than chimpanzees, and we've hit the apex of our growth. That's what he said in 2004. We're through. And any difference from that point will be marginal at best. Am I the only motherfucker that read that? Apparently so. I'm the only motherfucker that read the NATO study from last year, 3,710 pages, that basically said the planet is through. Don't worry about global warming if it is global warming. Don't worry about anything. We're through. All these facts make it, it's not by a factor of 10, like 10 to the 10th power or 3 to the 25th power. It transcends math, makes it geometrically better for us. If we're not cowards. Only if. But if we fall into the same bailiwick or the same universe or whatever the right word is, then it doesn't make a shit. This program has worked with 18% interest rates. 18. Now we're, 6 or 8. So interest rates would have to go up 1.5 times more than they are now. Now I know it works at 30% interest rate, although I didn't do it at 30% interest. I did it at 17, 18% interest rates. I know it works. The higher the interest rates go, the more it's a numbers game. Simple. And although I used to say we're only 2,000 calls away from you being a millionaire, now we're really about between 900 and 1,200 calls away from being a millionaire. And a millionaire is not a good benchmark anymore, but it's more money than most of you have in this room, so we'll use it. And we're going to show you a system later on in the week. 5 calls a day to millions. 5. And you won't do it. 5 calls. You won't do it. So even though I don't quander or query why you don't do it anymore, because the first 5 or 10 or 15 years it drove me nuts. I couldn't understand. Because it is a lower lifestyle as some of you have. It's the lap of motherfucking luxury compared to where I was raised, or my wife was raised. It's the lap, Sally loves to go, this is the lap of luxury. Sally lived in a mobile home about as big as this stage. 5 of them in that mobile home. And when we took her mother out on her 65th birthday a number of years ago, and we're on a yacht, and Sally got up to go take a pee, and then her mother, Jo, said, she can't possibly remember all this. She was only 2, 3, 4 years old. You do remember. You do remember. And Sally remembers. Sally remembers what the tablecloths looked like and the curtains as she was getting fucking beaten. Now, you may have blocked that away, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And now you've got some old psychopath, 77 years old, soon to be 78, that is turning these rocks over that you try to keep hidden all these years. Last night you saw Steve, if I remember correctly, who was a miserable human being. He changed the world, though. I used to ask, I don't ask anymore. This is, would you rather change the world and be with being a miserable human being, or not change the world? And most of you answer, well, I'd like to do good, but I'm not willing to make those sacrifices. Once in a while we get somebody like the pig fucker. I'll kill Jesus. And then you got a chance. A chance. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Comments, questions about Mr. Jobs? Yes, sir.
He was the master of the orchestra. He was the true master for Apple.
You're going to be the orchestra leader. There's 40 or 41 financial tools in our toolbox. We only use one. I don't teach the others. The B schools teach the others. I don't teach any of the others. The one, and that's commercial debt, but you start with insulting offers on seller's finance. He was the master. He wasn't interested in the facts. I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've been saying shit like this before I knew Steve. I may have been one of the last persons to see Steve alive. We were in Bangalore, India, and Sally and I, and we rarely go to clubs. For whatever reason, we met our lawyer there, and I look out of the corner of my eye and I see a guy on the dance floor. It's about 11 o'clock at night. He's kind of shuffling around by himself. And then I said, Sally, isn't that Steve Jobs? He said, yeah. This is 11. 1 o'clock, the place closes down. And Steve is still in another world. That virtual world that you don't know anything about. I'm sure that's where he was. Or he may have even been to another virtual world that I'm not aware of. And then I asked him a couple of times, the place was closed. He was in a different world. And he tried everything known to man to beat his cancer. He changed his diet. All the shit nothing worked. He waited too long. Because he thought he could beat it with his willpower. Fuck that chemotherapy. Fuck all that stuff. And if anybody could have done it with their willpower, it would have been him. But it didn't happen. What else about Steve? In the back, sir.
He was totally unreasonable, and he pushed the people around him to do better.
Just like you don't. Because you want to be liked. What else about Steve? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Steve saw the world differently, and it was hard for him to find others that saw it the same way.
I told you the first thing is going to, when you're chasing after chairman, your chairmen are not going to believe you don't need any money. And it's because you're not using the right words. I wouldn't believe if you told me it was money. Nobody in this room had any sales skills whatsoever. You couldn't give away a blowjob to a drunken sailor who had been at sea for 10 years. So either you're going to gain some communication, and when we tell you the Toastmasters and all this stuff, the joint clubs you can't afford, which hardly any of you are going to do. Some of you, was it you, the Detroit Club? Okay. Detroit Club, which is affiliated to the Jonathan Club, which is a prestigious club I belong to, and have been since 1981 a member. You're not going to do that. You're going to gravitate. The first thing you're going to do is go to Link Fuck and try to get a chairman, and you're going to skip the first 4 steps. I shouldn't even teach the first 4 steps. Seminar would be about 2 days shorter. Because you don't want to personally, when you're building your personal foundation, you've got to lay yourself open like a split watermelon and looking at all those things that you're fucked up at. And you don't want to do that. Some of you aren't capable of doing that. It's like the black lady with the big black dick from Idi Amin. And that's why nobody else teaches this way. Because at the end of the day, they want you to buy something else. At the end of the day, I don't give a fuck. What else about Steve? Yes, sir.
He knew that perception was reality, and his machines looked nice, but they didn't perform well.
Correct. Yes, sir, in the back.
The more you are able to force your will upon the world, the more successful you are going to be.
Sounds like Hitler. The greatest orator with the greatest sales skills in the last 100 years is Adolf Hitler. And I get a lot of shit because he's on my wall of influencers. I used to study how he spoke. I used to study him, Winston Churchill, and John Kennedy. What else about Jobs? Yes, sir, in the back again.
The major part of Apple was obviously software, but he couldn't write code.
There's been 3 movies about Steve Jobs. The one that you saw, I think, was the second one. There's another movie coming out. The longer you're dead, the more revealing the movies are about you, what an asshole you were. And so it's like movies about the Kennedys. I mean, Kennedy family, which are pretty rich and powerful. They've tried to keep the Kennedy legacy, the Cinderella bullshit, as long as possible. But now, there's been several movies about Ted Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, John Kennedy, and which shows their foibles and their, the cracks in their armor or their Achilles heels. Jobs is, these guys I've seen throw computers at people when I was there, 30 plus years ago, working on a deal for him. What else about Mr. Jobs? He didn't make as much money as a lot of the guys did, but he made a lot of money. Bless you. And arguably, vis-a-vis how much money he made, he changed the world more than other guys that made more money. But there's nobody in this room that wants to be, other than his fame and riches, and probably not the fame. They don't want the notoriety to do the stuff that he did. Now, why, when you're reading the books, etc., why don't you connect those dots? Why are you reading the books? Why are you listening to the podcast? Why? It's a waste of time. Since you're not going to do it. He is, and he's not the most, awful guy that created, it changed the world. Henry Ford was worse than he was, and Henry Ford changed the world. Henry Ford the first. There's other guys that a couple of gals that have been, miserable human beings. And he certainly didn't go to university, depending on what story you want to believe. He was either at college 3 days or 3 weeks. I'm not sure, but it was certainly not a month. And then we got guys with 6 degrees in this room, and go back and get your MBAs. And how's that worked out for you? I can tell you, it's a waste of time.